f0rest is one of the very greatest Counter-Strike players of all time across both of the major versions, 1.6 and CSGO, and most definitely one of the most skilled, and yet I think he's also one of the most overrated, and in a particular sense that people just ignore. And that might sound controversial, so I'm going to set it up to explain why in this video. So as a CSGO player, now listen, as a CS 1.6 player, there's basically three people who are in contention for the best player of all time. There's Potty, there's Neo, and there's f0rest. And I don't mind which of the three you pick. I did a 2-piece article series about this not that long ago, where I said that whoever you pick, it's up to you. It comes down to individual criteria at that point. They all three were incredibly great, incredibly successful, did so much and was so dominant in their primes that they're all great players. I pick Neo personally, that's my favorite, but I understand why people pick f0rest, because I think he was definitely the most skilled player of all time. His skill level was fucking crazy. In CSGO, again, he's one of the most skilled players of all time in CSGO, maybe the most skilled. If you want to talk purely just in terms of skill and what he can do, I'd say most skilled ever is probably between him, Kenny S, and then Get Right to a degree, but Get Right didn't necessarily dominate just off skill. He was very skilled, and Shocks. I'd say those are the four that are in the mix for all time in CSGO. So he's one of the best players ever in CSGO. An incredible rifle and pistol master in CSGO. In terms of just skill and aiming, this guy has probably the best long-range rifle aim I've ever seen in CSGO. I'm particularly thinking of clips where when he would play Nuke on CT side, he could go up on the rafters area as CT, and he could shoot terrorists who were just coming behind that box on the outside yard part and just like headshot them instantly from super far away with just like a silenced Colt. It's like absolutely insane, his pixel perfect aim sometimes. Obviously in pistols, he's legendary. I mean, the things this guy's capable of, he's capable of incredible rounds and halves where his level is so high, it looks like no one can match it. Like if he plays like this all the time, the game would be over. No one would ever be able to beat them. I mean, two recent rounds that come to mind, obviously, from the last major, DreamHack Winter. There was the pistol round against LDLC on Overpass, which is just like superlative stuff. Like, if another player hits even one or two of those shots, it's like, wow, what a great round. But to hit like 4 great USB headshots, like godlike stuff, like you can't even imagine doing stuff like this. That half against, the entire map actually, against Hellraisers on Inferno at DreamHack Winter in the quarterfinals was just like out of this universe stuff, like tapping with the AK, just bursting, instant headshots everywhere. If you were a Hellraisers player then, some of their players are really skilled, that would be such a demoralizing game. You know, there's nothing you could do. You just got destroyed by the guy. So I've just described there all the wonderful things about f0rest, and yet why is he overrated to me? And why is there a crucial area where I don't see him get criticized? I don't see him be analyzed accurately in a way that every other player comes under fire and comes under scrutiny. f0rest is the most overrated CSGO player of all time. Let's start during the better times. In the early days of CSGO, so 2012 when NiP would never lost, 2013 they would rarely lose, and usually only to the best team in the world or a team playing godlike CS. People always tried to make out like it was debatable, like, oh, who's the best? Is it Get Right? Is it f0rest? That was never even a close battle. It was Get Right by far. Almost every game he was better in terms of frags, in terms of game impact, in terms of key moments within a round that would turn the game in their favour or bring you back into a game. Obviously, Get Right was a closer also. He would win impossible 1vx situations. He was good in all areas of the game, all weapons, even the auto sniper. That actually wasn't close. Yeah, f0rest was the second best for the majority of that period. But the difference between first and second wasn't like some tiny little margin. It was a solid step there. And if you looked at the game overall and every map and every half, you would see the difference there. Yes, f0rest could have the amazing half. He could carry NiP for a while. But the main carry and the main star of NiP in this period was Get Right. He was overwhelmingly the best player over this period of time. So first of all, he was overrated in that sense that he was the second best player, but people tried to make out like he might have been the first. In that one, it wasn't really debatable. It was Get Right for sure. Now, crucially, what made him godlike in that era, made NiP unbeatable, was that since he was the second best player of that period of time overall, until Shocks came around and got godlike at the end of the year, since overall he was second best, and he was playing on a team with the best player, that meant that he now wasn't even the main star, he was the second star. So if your second star is better than every other team's main star, you can see why NiP was so dominant. These two players, they really did carry nearly every single time. Like every single time Dignitas used to get smashed by NiP in those semis or big games. Go back and watch. And it was always Get Right and f0rest just dropping 20, 25, 30 on like Nuke Reckoning on Inferno. Like, that was the whole reason these other teams couldn't beat them, because, yeah, they had a good strategy, and they had good synergy and good team play, and they had the right approach, and they'd play all the maps, and all these factors helped them be successful. But having this godlike 1-2 punch, who would either take turns, or if they both came at the same time, they were just unbeatable. This is what made Nip unbeatable. So that's the crucial thing. He was the greatest second star. That was the best role that he was in, and that was why Nip was so good. The reason why I say that he's overrated is because, really, I've never seen people saying, like, hey, you know what? Actually, f0rest isn't playing well at the moment. He's really dropped out of my top 10, or he's not in my top 5. Like, he's playing poorly at the moment. Like, he needs to step it up. Or, you know what? Maybe they should think about removing f0rest. And I actually think, no joke, from seeing how it was in 1.6 in CSGO, I think f0rest could play, like, mediocre to average to poor in NIP, a massive team with all this spotlight on them, for like a year, and I think people still wouldn't entirely get on the band, and they'd never have like a hate bandwagon of like, he sucks, get him off the team. That would never happen to him. And the reason why is because of how flashy and how volatile and how unpredictable his game is. Because of that, it's almost like a gambler's mentality. You know where they say that one of the problems with gamblers is they only remember the win, and they remember the buzz they got off the win, and they remember how awesome that was. And so even if they lose 4 or 5 times for every time they win, every time they're losing and it sucks, that feeling, they're just thinking like, oh, forget that. When I win again, it'll all go away. Or they don't remember that. They go like, oh, I'm sure I can win again. I'm sure it'll happen again. They're so addicted to that feeling. So I feel like people just look at the awesome half or the awesome round f0rest has, and they go, look, he's one of the best players in the whole world. Now, when he has like the next few rounds, he does nothing, and he has a half where he plays subpar, and he has a whole map where he does less than like Exist even does in the map, people just forgive it somehow. They just forget about it. And then they wait till he has the godlike map again. See, yeah, he's one of the best ever, him. Just a great player. He's so good. And then they talk about it like, but on his peak, he's just like, he's the best player in the whole world. Yeah, that's the key thing though. How often is his peak? His peak was way less than Get Rights. His peak was way less than Shocks at the end of the year. His consistency is one of the key problems. When you look at consistency, you can't just look at someone's godlike game and go, that's his real level. And if he could get there all the time. Well, f0rest has shown us, but in his like 10-year career, that he's not going to get to that level of consistency. This isn't even a consistency issue. This is who he is. Some games he is amazing. Some games he's into it. Some games he's keyed in and everything works. Other games he's diminished. He's lackluster. There's almost a weak-willed character to his game. He just plays average, plays okay, doesn't seem motivated, doesn't seem into it. He's not going to change as a person and as a player. We know who f0rest is. There's not going to be much development there. If he really was so godlike as people make out like that, then he would dominate the whole game and he'd wreck everyone. I always used to say this about Scream. Yeah, Scream did have, it would seem, the best aim. But if he had the best aim, why wasn't he using that aim to get the most kills, to dominate the game, to make very games win every tournament? He wasn't. If he used to have big problems in that team, actually having game impact, despite such insane skills. And so just like with Scream and now with f0rest, I feel like people will always have an inherent bias to the flashy, fiery kind of player and forgive when he has bad games. Whereas the player who's just really consistent and grinding, but doesn't have insane highs, but just really grinding and always gives you the 16, 17 frag, somehow those ones don't get any credit. And if they have a poor, like a couple of games that are bad, people are like, they suck anyway, they're not as good as him. Like, there's an inherent bias there. Like I say, if f0rest was this godlike player in that particular sense, then why wouldn't he just choose to be godlike and win all these games? Why would he disappear sometimes? Why would he have problems at certain occasions? I mean, for example, think about the example I gave before, we had that godlike LDLC pistol round on Overpass, the deciding map of the grand final. Remember, they got to have 2 match points to win the whole DreamHack Winter Major. Where was f0rest after that pistol round? Where was he during the rest of that overtime? Where was he when LDLC mounted their comeback? Where was he once they reached match point, when LDLC won those rounds and then when LDLC won the overtime session? Where was f0rest then? Where was his incredible aim then? Where was his unbeatable peak? Which, by the way, these things are all true, they exist, but they weren't there. They weren't there when it mattered the most. They weren't there in this particular moment when if he'd have done even some of that, it probably would have won the whole game for his team. If he really was the god that people are trying to make him out to be, that he would be able to do this. If he had the consistency people pretend he could have, then this wouldn't even be an issue. And that's one of the key things. Because when people talk about that aspect, I'm not making out like he has to be a closer, like he has to be the guy who wins the 1v2, or he has to be the guy who always wins the clutch rounds at the end. That's a key thing. There's a bias actually in sports journalism for that. They always give more credit to the guy who's like the hero, who hits the last shot, or the closer guy. But actually, I've always thought they were a bit unfair with that. Like a great example from the NBA is LeBron James. LeBron James more recently a couple of years back, did have problems closing games. He would just defer to lesser players, or he wouldn't embrace the moment of trying to be the star. And it's true, there was this one final in 2011 where he did kind kind of choke. And then crucially, another guy on the other team, Dirk Nowitzki, showed him up by being really clutch in that way. But actually, even if LeBron hadn't have fixed his game in that sense, because he did become more of a closer later and more cutthroat, more killer instinct, even if he hadn't have done that, he still would have been an incredibly great player with a lot of value, maybe still the most valuable player in the league, because he could get you to that point of the game. He could put up his kills and get you to that point where someone else could just close. So if you'd have then got him a good closer like Dwayne Wade or something like that, or Ray Allen could hit a clutch shot, if you'd have got him something like that, he still could have won titles. It wouldn't have been like a fatal flaw that would ruin his whole career. And in this sense, f0rest's whole game isn't built around being the closer. It's around being like the entry guy who runs in and destroys them, or the middleman who puts up some key kills here to decimate and wins like a 3v3. He just makes it a 3v1 and it's over already. In this particular scenario, and you've got Get Right, the great closer, you've got Exist, who's a really clutch player. You don't need a great closer. He doesn't have to be in that sense. I'm not talking about him becoming a closer and making that, but consistency is something where if he ever wants to be considered this great player, or as great as people are overrating him to be sometimes and giving him the free pass when he has the bad game, then the thing he has to improve, in my opinion, is consistency. And I don't think that'll happen because, first of all, his game is just wildly inconsistent in terms of how it's based. It's so based around that precision aim that when you miss, you just miss completely. You're not just spraying into the body and getting the kill that way. But in terms of motivation and working on your craft and refining and wearing off those little rough corners, it's all smooth, like Get Right, someone like him's done and putting a lot of work, Kenny S has done, etc. f0rest is not that sort of person. He's consistently shown over the last 5 or 6 years that he has runs of motivation where, yeah, I'm into it now and I've got a new player and the team's playing well. And then I'll have months where it's just sort of like, yeah, I do what I can. I do a bit here, I do a bit there. And that even goes with his personality as a guy. Like, he's never embraced like, yeah, I am the greatest 1.6 player. He's always the guy who's like, nah, Neo's really good, they're really good. There's a lot of good players. Get Right's good on my team. Marklov's good there. Like, he never wanted to even be the star. He just wanted to be a good player, have fun, play. Sometimes you win, cool. He's the guy where you noticed, if you ever see Nip lose a huge match, you'll almost never see f0rest like mad or angry or even looking that sad. Meanwhile, Get Right, a guy who works on every second of every day and blames himself. Actually, he looks distraught when he loses. Freeberg was mad as fuck when they lost that DreamHack win. He was so disappointed with himself and with everything. f0rest actually, it goes hand in hand with his personality. It's just not his personality to be that way. Crucially as well, in history, the fact that f0rest sometimes doesn't show up has been a problem overall in history, actually, at certain times. Like, he's still one of the greatest ever. In terms of even winning big titles, he's still one of the best ever. He won 3 majors in CS in 1.6. But here's the thing. He won 3 majors, but he made it to the final of 7 majors. And of the 7 majors in 1.6 he made it to the final of, he was a favourite in 5 of them. And in the 2 he wasn't a favourite. He wasn't an underdog. Those were like 50-50s in terms of going into it, who would have been the favourite. So he was never an underdog, yet he actually lost the majority of his finals. He's only won 3 out of the 7. And of the 3 he won, 2 of those were in the latter half of his career when he got Get Right, and Get Right was going God mode, and Get Right was actually the best player in that team and overall in Sweden at the time. So to a degree, he wasn't even the main star on 2 of the 3 he won. Now, to give you some contrast about that, because people who don't know 1.6, well, what's the relevance of that? He won 3 and he lost 7. Well, okay, so Neo, the guy who's in the equation with him, Neo made it to 9 major finals, assuming you count the first IEM final, which personally I don't. So you can say 9 or you can say 8 if you're me. I'm just putting that in as a caveat. Now, of the 9, he won 7, or in my world, he won 6. In the 9 finals he was in, he was only a favourite in 2 of those finals, and yet he won 7 of them. This is incredible. You can see the difference in performance and when you always play in the big game, when you always turn up. That was the thing with Neo. He always turned up in the big game. He never lost. His teams never lost because he didn't play a star role. They lost because of other factors and better teams. Often, like I said, they weren't the favourite in a lot of them. They were playing better teams. Sometimes they lost because of that. Although, by the way, they lost very rarely. I said like 2 out of 9 times. Another piece of contrast, the Na'Vi players, Markov, Edward, those star players, they were in 6 major finals. They won 4. So these teams all won more, either as underdogs or with less finals experience. So this was something that did haunt f0rest. And obviously, we have to take that and bring it into CSGO, and the same factors happening because it's the same people who were playing these star roles. In CSGO, f0rest's been in all 4 of the majors. He's been in all 4 of the finals. We all know that, right? How many of the 4s he won? 1. He won 1, the one time, believe it or not. He was probably a slight underdog. ESL 1 Cologne. The DreamHack Winter Final, after beating very games, he should have won that. He was a big favourite. The EMS1 Katowice final. Okay, it's true, Virtus.pro were phenomenal in that tournament. I just said that was close to a 50-50 because Nip had the 10-year, but Virtus.pro had never won before, but Virtus.pro did have a great form. I'd say that was 50-50. I still think if they had have banned Mirage, it would have been a close series as it was later. Okay, that one, 50-50. The last one. See, now people, it's true, LDLC were the favourite. They were the second best team in the world. They were better, and also Nip, it's a brand new team, and they'd been improving as they'd gone on. But at the same time, just like the Cologne one, it's not like they would be massive underdogs, because in Cologne, Fnatic's lineup then hadn't really won a big event with that new lineup. And in the same way, LDLC were a great team, but they hadn't won a big event with that lineup. They'd only won Star Ladder. Their team had actually failed a bunch of times, not just against Fnatic, against fucking iBuyPower in the semi-final of Face It. So it's not like these were unwinnable scenarios. But there were times when f0rest was let down in some of these scenarios. He didn't play well at all in Katowice. DreamHack Winter, he was fairly lackluster. ESL 1 Cologne, he was good. He was a good player there. DreamHack Winter, he had some moments, he had some halves, but he never was like the dominant player. He was never going to be the MVP of the final, for example. So there's some of the reasons why, as bizarre as it sounds, he's one of the greatest players ever. He's one of the 5 best players ever in CSGO. Yet in its own way, f0rest still gets overrated. And I feel like people in a very unfair analytical way, or just fan bias, give him free passes for when he has bad games or when he doesn't do that well. And they only remember the good rounds and the good halves and the good shots he makes. And as a result, they give him credit over some other players who were as good or better, who actually deserve some fairness, a bit of justice in terms of how you analyse them. So as bizarre as it sounds, that's why I don't want any more free passes for f0rest.